The NDP has a new leader. After rallying party members and smashing fundraising records, Avi Lewis won the top job with 56% of the vote on the first ballot. Now he's tasked with rebuilding the party after its historic loss in last year's federal election.
The NDP will start winning again because we will become that beacon to the 99%.
Go for it.
Illuminating the darkening sky of these terrifying times with the energizing light of collective struggle. This is about all of us coming together to find our place and our power in the thrilling work of building a shared future, a government that works for the many, not the money.
There are lots of questions for the new leader as he takes the reins. When will he run for a seat in Parliament, and where will that be? And how will he handle the already rocky relationship between the federal NDP and some of its provincial counterparts? The Power Panel is here to talk about all of that. Vonda Cotter was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me, Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst, and Rob Rousseau is Canada correspondent for The Economist. Brad, I do want to start with you. What do you make of the choice of Avi Lewis in terms of what it says for the direction of the NDP?
Yeah, well, I think for Mr. Lewis, the victory was decisive. 56% on the first ballot, I think, is a clear signal that he was able to convince not only the pre-existing members that were members prior to the leadership contest beginning, but also new members. And so clearly, he's got a clear mandate. He also won, his slate also won the table officer elections, president and the other table officer positions as well. So he has really no friction to do what he wishes to the party. And he's also, a very good communicator and getting lots of good profile. The challenge is, though, the easy part is done. Now the hard work begins. The first thing is not to become invisible. This is a big challenge, and you don't want the notion that when you got elected you get all this media coverage, you get to come on Power and Politics on the Monday show. That's great. In the first 48 to 72 hours are a lot of media attention, but it's not going to be that way indefinitely. So to stay in the spotlight so that people get to know you, remember your name. It's challenging to be a leader of an opposition party without a seat in the House of Commons. Next thing is fundraising. He clearly out-fundraised his competitors, all combined. He still raised more money. The previous leaders have been lackluster fundraisers. There's a debt from the last election, and he has to have clearly an agenda for fundraising. You don't get to pick where you are in the polls, but you can pick other metrics of momentum, and one of those is fundraising. And the third one, on your point of unity. This to me is the most important one, because you can't build the federal party if you were at war with provincial sections. And I just want to take a second to describe how important this is. In British Columbia, in the last BC election, the BC NDP got 45% of the vote. In the last federal election, the federal NDP in BC got 13%. In Alberta, in the last Alberta election, the Alberta NDP got 44%. In the last federal election, the federal NDP got 6%. And in Saskatchewan, the last provincial election, the Saskatchewan NDP got 40%, and in the last federal election, it got 7%. So when you're talking about, we're the federal party and, we can have differences with our provincial sections, that is what is at stake if we don't unify as a party. And we are going to have provincial elections in each of those provinces that I named. There will be other provincial elections as well, but those three in particular before the next federal election. And I think, Mr. Lewis is going to have to take this notion and the responsibility of making sure that the party is united. He has to take that on, not the provincial sections independent of his outreach. That, to me, is the most important next step for Mr. Lewis.
Kate, in terms of the numbers that Brad has just brought up, going forward with Avi Lewis as their choice, what is more likely in your mind to happen? That, the provincial parties that have done well in their provincial elections bringing the federal party up, or the federal party with its fortunes hurting the chances of the provinces?
I think it's too early to say. I do have a lot of empathy for what the NDP are going through because, in the last federal election, we had the governing Ontario PC party not getting along well with its federal counterpart. So I think that we have seen in recent history how detrimental it can be when all parts of the conservative movement are rowing in the same direction. And I think the same can be said of the progressives and the New Democrats. I think Brad spoke to the importance of visibility. The challenge for Mr. Lewis right now is he's visible for not the right reasons. What's making headlines is this friction that exists with provincial parties. He is in a position where he ought to be looking to grow the movement and find common ground, and I don't know that that's necessarily been a strength of his.
Rob, not only is he making headlines for that, but also for his actual platform and what he won on. Something that stood out for me from his remarks yesterday was this call for what sounds very much like nationalization of certain industries. Have a listen.
He's a communist.
A network of public providers for food, phones, and internet. A public housing developer and public construction companies to build millions of non-market homes. A 21st century electrical grid, an EV bus revolution, and a heat pump in every home. Built with Canadian steel, creating tens of thousands of unionized jobs.
So do you hear that as confiscating profits? What do you make of that take on how Canada should move forward?
Let me get to his positions in a second, because I think of course they're important. But let me just tell you about some of the things that he has going for him and why I think we would be in error not paying attention to him. As Brad said, he's an excellent communicator. This is a man who knows how to unspool a phrase that could connect with people. His challenge is, as Brad said, to get attention, but he knows how to get attention. And Brad will remember, because he was there, that Jack Layton wasn't in the House in the first year, but he managed to get attention. He turned up every day in the lobby of the House of Commons and got attention that way. This is somebody who I think can do that. His French, I think, is painful at times, if not labored, but there's enough of a foundation there. He's clearly bright and a good communicator. If he put in the time, I think he would get there. I think time is his friend. A majority mandate might help him. Get attention and mend fences, which is, I'm coming closer to answering to your question, because when it comes to his positions, I think he is laboring with a small handicap. He's against the capitalist system. Right? I don't know if it's nationalization. I remember, I'm old enough to remember Ed Broadbent, and he talked about nationalizing the banks at a certain point. But he is really down on capitalism, and he's down on pulling things out of the ground to keep Canada rich. And when you look at where his vote came from, it's clear that he was, again, very organized. Great at raising money, but all that vote is urban vote. And where is the NDP strong right now? Where could they form the next government? They could form it in Saskatchewan. Tougher to do, I think, in Alberta, but they're strong there. Who's going to vote for him in the province of Alberta? And I look at those ridings. I look at the ridings that the NDP lost, particularly to the Conservatives, because people forget they lost more seats to the Conservatives than they did to the Liberals. I think it was 10 versus 7. They're in places like Windsor West, Hamilton Mountain, London Fanshawe. So in other words, union workers. And you look at Rob Ashton's results yesterday, they were pretty dismal for a pretty good union guy. Huge fences to mend there. And then he lost, the NDP lost seats in British Columbia, in Powell River, Cowichan, in North Island, in Skeena Bulkley Valley. Those are forest workers, I would assume, most of those people. So he has trouble with the union movement, and he has trouble with resource workers as well. That's a big, big challenge. So he's going to need the time just to mend fences inside and around his own house.
And Vandana, if he has the time, and he is what people say is a good communicator, though, can he sell not just his NDP members and within his own party, but the greater public on some of his ideas that to some seem pretty far left compared to the NDP of the recent past?
Communist.
I think it's too early to tell. I think we'll have to see where those ideas take off. And like we said, he has time on his hands. So it takes time to figure out what idea might take off and what can evolve over time and getting clarity to what that means. I think where he can entice some people is that a lot of people feel that the system doesn't work for them. And one line that caught my attention is saying, doing well for the wages and jobs that you currently have. So for those who are PSWs, they're nurses, they're teachers, and chose to be those professions over corporate lawyers, they might say, you know what? Yeah, I hear what you're saying. So it kind of brings forward more about his concepts around affordability. So people may not like the ideas, but he has time to move those around and evolve them. And I think that's going to work for him. And meeting people where they're at to have them to inform those ideas. So I think at this point, with the NDP going at 6%, anyone who can bring media attention, because you don't have, I've done third party, you don't have many resources. You're relying on volunteers and other party resources in terms of the province, which is where having issues with the provincial cousins could be an issue for him. But I think the long term, we'll have to see. Either he can take off and some ideas can both harm and bite into where the Conservatives are as well as where the Liberals are, and hit in those seats exactly as Rob has mentioned. But I think we'll have to see where it goes, because the first few days are easy. It's going to be the next few months that's going to be harder for him to keep that momentum going.
Kate, when it comes to attention and trying to keep the profile up with all these challenges that Vandana talked about, Avi Lewis this morning said he's not seeking a seat right away, that he needs time to rebuild the coffers of the party, for example. Is that pragmatic? Is that the right approach, do you think? Is that okay if he does that, but pulls a Jack Layton and goes to the foyer at least once a week to try and grab? How does he balance that?
You certainly need to be creative when you don't have a seat in the House, but it's far from a prerequisite. What I think is going well for Mr. Lewis is that there are a number of issues before Canadians today, before the government today, where he could propose a real contrast to the governing Liberals. That is the case for climate, where we know that there's members of the Liberal caucus that are very dissatisfied with the Carney government's approach on climate. They've taken some pretty big swings at labour unions. I don't think it is the last that we will see of, I'll say, pro-employer policy that's coming from this Carney government. I think there's an opportunity there for the NDP. And I'm thinking about, childcare and the fact that the feds aren't going to be putting much more money into that program, and provinces now being left to carry the weight of that themselves. So there is opportunity on a number of issues, I believe, for Mr. Lewis to chip away at the progressive bona fides of this Prime Minister. He'll have to be creative about how to do that from outside the House.
Mm-hmm. Brad, you talked about, and I asked you about the whole unity issue with the provinces versus the federal party. Today, Avi Lewis, and actually I believe even started saying yesterday, said his door's always open to someone like Carla Beck, who's the leader of the Saskatchewan NDP. But she's saying in a letter she's not talking to him or meeting with him until he changes his stance on fossil fuels. So what are you looking for in that, what seems to be right now a standoff?
Well, I think it's very important that, the policies that he has that are upsetting some of our western provincial sections are clearly understood. Even just during your interview with your earlier today on this show with you, he was clarifying for the record, because the challenge in politics, which is different from other kind of jobs, is that those that are seeking to beat you at elections don't necessarily care if they're 100% accurate on the criticism that you're saying, right? So he's going to have to work very hard at it. A lot of it is tone, and a lot of it is getting out there and making sure that he's doing everything that he can to not give any strength to the opponents, right? So you've already got Daniel Smith out. in Alberta. You've already got Scott Moe out there. You've already got the Conservatives in British Columbia who are having their own leadership race right now. All of them are attacking their provincial NDP because of what Avi Lewis, ran on in the leadership race. So he's going to have to explain to British Columbians, Albertans, Saskatchewanians exactly where he stands on these particular issues, as opposed to letting the opponents define him. And I think that that's been a problem in the past, where it's been Daniel Smith beating up Naheed Nenshi because of what Jagmeet Singh was perceived to either believe in or run on. So he's going to have to be that. But I want to build on that the notion of time. He has a lot of bold ideas. Some of these bold ideas will capture attention and maybe capture some support out there for folks that voted for other parties in the last federal election. But he's going to have to explain it, because it takes a long time. People don't naturally think that we should have a public option for grocery stores. Would that work? He's going to have to explain that. But he's got the time to, and I think he's got the communications capability. So he's in this era of, he's going to have to persuade people to support his ideas. He's going to have to spend some time explaining them, much more than say, I'm going to lower your taxes, which it doesn't need to be explained much more further than that. But some of his bolder ideas, I think, do require a little bit more explanation.
Now, something he also said in he made reference to his family yesterday in terms of, everyone talks about him being NDP royalty because of his grandfather and father. And he spoke about his father, former Ontario NDP leader Stephen Lewis, who is in the hospital right now. I want you to have a listen to this.
He told me something kind of heartbreaking that David, his father, said to him once. David said, "Son, not in my lifetime, but maybe in yours." And recently my dad told me the same thing. Not in my lifetime, maybe in yours. Well, Dad, I refuse to tell that to my kid. We cannot wait another generation. We've got to start winning now.
Vandana, what did you make of that moment?
I mean, he's a dynamic speaker. And I think that's what people will be interested in that. And what he said exactly, I mean, people don't want, whether it's climate change or a number of issues, they don't want to hear it passed down to the next generation's problem. So I think that would resonate with people. Again, it goes back to what those solutions are. And he has time to make those solutions and find a way to, right now, his support can seem narrow. He's talking about socialism, being unapologetic. He's taking very, almost like polarizing in some cases, views on certain topics. And that might scare people, but as time goes on, he has more time to broaden his base of people. So anyone who is unhappy with the current system, feels that they're not getting ahead, and is tired of similar policies of lowering taxes or tax credit, they are dynamic ideas. Whether they work, we don't know yet, but in opposition, you don't have to share that how it's gonna work. You're gonna have to share a new idea and say, I have a better idea than the other guy. So if he can do that, I think that'll help where he's at in 3 years from now, should we hit a majority government. But I think it's moments like that charisma that people could be drawn to.
Quickly, Rob, what's your thoughts on that moment that we saw?
I thought it was a deft way of letting people know that he's a prince of the realm and that he's comfortable with that. And I also thought it goes against my previous argument of time being his friend, because the first question he's going to be asked is, it looks like there's going to be an opening in Beaches, East York, where Nate Erskine Smith is probably going to leave to run for the provincial Liberals. If that's the case, the NDP has done well there in the past. They've won that seat in the past. It would seem a natural place for him to run. Why isn't he going to run? If time is of the issue, that's one of the questions he'd better be expecting.
Smash the like, hit subscribe, get your Canadian federal politics right here.